Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Pantheon plus New Relic, Monitor Your Entire Web Stack. Your speakers for today are Josh Koenig, co-founder here at Pantheon, along with our guest speaker, Marco Marquez, Technical Partner Manager at New Relic. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we start. Please make sure you submit any questions you have during the presentation in the question window, or tweet them at GetPantheon. We will answer as many of the questions as we can during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Also, this webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be made available to everyone next week. I'd now like to turn it over to Josh and Marco.
Thank you very much, Atusa. So like Atusa mentioned, my name is Marco, and I'm a technical partner manager at New Relic. I've been with the company with New Relic for approximately 2.5 years. I've been in this role for around 6 months, and before that I was a sales engineer at New Relic, helping our direct customers. After those 2 years, I kind of moved over to the channel business, and I'm super excited to talk to you guys and all of the Pantheon customers today about the cool integration that we have between our two companies. Now I'll let Josh introduce himself.
Thanks, Marco. So I'm really excited to be doing this webinar today. I, as a co-founder of Pantheon, helped work out the initial New Relic integration more than 4 years ago. It was pretty early days, and New Relic has come a long way since then, and there's a lot to show there. So I'm really excited for Marco to show a lot of the capabilities that are in New Relic's complete suite of tools, and then I'm also super excited to showcase the kind of deep dive that we now make available to all sites on Pantheon. So let's just get right into it. Marco, why don't you talk a little bit about New Relic and the full product offering?
Of course. Thank you, Josh. So let me go ahead and start talking a little bit more about New Relic for those of us who are not super familiar with New Relic. So who or what is New Relic? So let's go ahead and start and divide kind of your application or your business into three: the business success, the customer experience, and the application performance. Now, you may know New Relic as a APM solution, but we actually are a lot more than that. We're a software analytics company, and like I said, we divide kind of your application or your business into three. Let's go ahead and start talking about the application performance side. As you can see, we have multiple modules. Okay, out of those modules, the one that focus on application performance will be APM, servers, and plugins. Now, let me talk a little bit about each of these. Let's start with the APM, which is going to be, I think, the one that is one of the most useful modules for you guys. APM, or Application Performance Monitoring or Management, it's going to be the monitoring of your backend. We're talking about the monitoring of the application's database, external calls, the code that we're running, these kind of things. And I'll go ahead and kind of show you guys a demo so you can actually see how New Relic interprets this APM kind of area or topic, right? Now, we also have servers. Servers is going to be the monitoring of your infrastructure, meaning we're going to be monitoring the CPU, the memory, the processes that you're running. So it's going to be really focused on the hardware, where your application sits on top of. Now, we also have plugins. We know that your application is not the only thing that you only care about, right? There's a lot of things like load balancing. There's a lot of things like, maybe deep SQL monitoring. These kind of things will be monitored by plugins, and it's something that we're going to be talking about a little bit. Then on the other side, we have the customer experience. And here we're going to have three additional modules. We're going to have the mobile, the browser, the synthetics. Okay? Mobile is going to be the monitoring of your native or hybrid applications, right? What that means is that we're going to be adding a little agent similar to how APM and server works. And this agent will be an SDK that will start pulling all these metrics and sending them over to the cloud for you to analyze those and actually make some analysis on it, right? Now we have browser. Browser is going to be the module that will start monitoring the front-end experience of your application. We know that the application can be the best behaving application, let's say, from the back end, but let's say if from the browser side we have a huge load time, your customer's experience is not going to be the best, and maybe they're not going to purchase, right? If we are talking to an e-commerce platform, like most of you guys are. We also have synthetics, which is going to cover, again, part of the customer experience. And that is going to be the monitoring of your application from different locations at different times. You can think of synthetics as a module that will allow you to run tests from different locations to confirm that the user can accomplish a specific thing, right? So maybe we are talking to a e-commerce platform company, and whenever that happens, we want to confirm that the user can purchase a specific product, right? In order to do that, we need to use synthetics so that we can confirm that the user can actually do that. Now you can see that we have another module that sits on top of all these other modules, right? This is going to be Insights, and Insights is going to capture all this information from all the modules that we have mentioned, and we are going to be displaying that and showing that to you guys so that you guys can start querying and interrogating your application to make sure that you get the analytics that you want. This is going to be a very, very powerful tool for you guys, and I'm really, really excited to talk to you guys about it. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the customer journey, right? So let's say that we have a normal customer, right? A customer that comes to New Relic most of the time is going to be in what we call the reactive application performance layer. What that means is that we're going to have a company that is reactive by nature. We're going to have some fires, we're going to have some finger pointing, we're going to have some loss in revenue, and we're going to have Twitter responses that are not going to be so positive, right? And that is obviously something that we want to avoid. So that is really the reactive state. We don't want to be there. So what can we do about it? Well, we can move to the proactive performance management. That's when you implement 4 of the 6 modules that I mentioned before. APM is going to be covering your backend, right? It's going to start kind of giving you metrics that allow you to figure out whether the problem, let's say it's a backend problem, a database problem, a code problem, an external call problem, right? Or if it's the actual RAM, maybe you need more RAM. Maybe you need a little bit, maybe you need to scale a little bit more, right? Maybe add a couple of instances. Or maybe something else, right? Now, the second part will be once you actually stop focusing on the backend and now you start focusing on the customer experience management, okay? That involves, again, the browser, synthetics, mobile, and insights. Meaning the way that your users connect will be what you're going to be analyzing, right? So you're going to start looking at the DOM processing, the page rendering, the network time, these kind of things. And in addition to that, if you have a mobile application, you also start tracking that. And finally, we're going to have the data-driven software business. And that is going to be when you put the whole platform together to good use, so that we start tracking all the metrics that we're collecting using insights, so that we start making data-driven decisions that not only take into account the performance metrics that we're collecting, but you start enhancing that performance metrics with something that we call custom events or custom attributes that start helping you identify where you could actually increase the amount of revenue by, let's say, decreasing X amount of seconds from your load time, right? These kind of things that you'll be able to answer, okay? So that's a customer journey. Now, let me go ahead and actually show you the application, because I think that's really what most of us are here for, right? So this is going to be a sample application that I just put together. You can see that we have already a couple of applications here. We have 4 applications. Now, the way that you will log into New Relic is actually pretty straightforward. You go to newrelic.com, log in. All these things will be there for you, set up for you. Pantheon, because of this integration, will already kind of do the heavy lifting for you, and will already install the agent for you and do all these things, right? So all you really have to do is log in. Once you log in, the application should be there, okay? In case you are interested in actually finding out more about the install process, you can always click Add More, and you'll be able to then kind of follow that process and kind of add different applications that you may have. Now, let's assume that the application is already set up for us. And let me go back to APM. I don't know why it's not loading right now. Okay. Let me try and open a new tab. Okay. All right. I don't know why this is not loading, but let me go ahead and just click one of the applications that it's right now struggling, right? Order service. Here you can actually see that it has this yellow status bar, right? It tells us there's something going on. So you can see right away that we have a response time. That is going to be the application, the time that it takes for the application to respond to a specific request, right? And we're going to have an aggregate view for all these connections that we're seeing. So in this case, it tells us that the backend it's around 437 milliseconds in terms of response time. We have then something called the aptX. The aptX is going to be that index between 0 and 1 that tells us how the application is doing. If you want to find out more about the aptX, I suggest that you go to aptX.org. It's an industry standard. We just implemented it, but it is something that you guys will be able to find anywhere. If you also want to go to the hover over this question mark, you're also going to see a little bit more information about aptX. Okay. Now, we also have the throughput or requests per minute that we're seeing, right? In this case, the order service application is telling us that we have around 10 requests per minute. Really good metric to keep track of. We also see the error rate and transactions. Now, I'll really just focus on the main features that most of our customers like and use very, very often. But keep in mind that we have a lot of other things that we can talk about, okay? And if you do have any question about a specific feature, definitely kind of write it as part of the chat functionality of GoToMeeting, and then we'll definitely kind of talk about it once we get to that Q&A. So here we have something called transactions. Transactions is going to be the way that we divide the application. And in this case, you can see that orders is really the one taking the most amount of time. Then we have order status, a couple of other things, right? Let me go ahead and actually, let's say, select one. I'm going to select order history. Here we're going to see that this has actually a very low aptX. That tells me that we're having some issues here, or we may have some issues, right? Maybe we're not expecting it to take around 2 seconds just in the back end, right? So if that's the case, we look at this. There's going to be an aggregate view. It tells us kind of what the traffic is. We can see the throughput. We can see a breakdown table. All of these will be aggregates, right? It's going to tell us a way for us to know, okay, what exactly is going on. But if we're talking to a developer, or we are developers, right, we need to make sure that we have something called reproduction scenarios. We need to be able to reproduce this issue. So we are going to provide something called transaction traces, which will allow you to go in and actually take a look at an example of something kind of going haywire, right? This is going to be at the individual level. You click here, you're going to see that this actually happened a couple of minutes ago, okay, at 9:55 Pacific time. It took around 2 seconds. And you can see here where exactly we spent most of our time. You can see that it's actually pretty straightforward to find out what exactly happened. We're going to have a call, okay, running of the code, and then a call to their database. You can see here that you can even click the drill down, and you're going to see the stack trace. You're going to also see a couple of the database calls that we did, including also the processing of a transaction. Okay? So we're going to be showing a lot of information right out of the box without having to modify any code. Right? In this case, we actually can see that we have the query. That is the query that actually took 819 milliseconds, which made up around 43% of the time. Now you may say, well, that is kind of useful, but that question mark, I want to get rid of that. We actually have the capability of removing that out of the box. We're going to be obfuscating that information. We're going to be talking a lot more, and actually Josh is going to be mentioning WordPress and Drupal specific features. I just wanted to quickly introduce the transaction trace feature, so it's not really brand new when Josh actually addresses that. Okay? Now, a lot of customers really also have a very complex application, right? So a lot of times we need to make sure that the application, that New Relic, follows a request from one application to the other, right? So if that's the case, a lot of times we want to point customers to something called the external services. Here you're going to see the services that are interacting with the application, the order service, right? In this case, you can see that inventory service and process order is actually one that follows the request, right? So from one request to the other. I can click that, and that's going to open the inventory service application to the transaction that I just selected. So it's a really cool feature that I wanted to make sure that you guys knew about. Service maps also is along the same lines, right? New Relic is smart enough to actually know which applications are monitoring, are kind of following different applications, right? You can also group things if you want to. You can do a lot of really cool things with this service map, and it's something that customers really like. following on, I want to finally cover errors. A lot of times, you may have an application that it's maybe not kind of slowing down as much as you think, but it is kind of causing some errors. And that is something that New Relic out of the box will also be covering. As you can see, if you click errors, you can see all these errors. I can select any of them. There's a demo environment, so we are kind of not faking, but obviously controlling these errors. So you won't see a stack trace here, but if you do see a stack trace, and that's actually the normal scenario, don't be surprised, you would get literally a stack trace of the error. So that is going to be APM. Like I said, Josh is going to be talking about some of the features that I just mentioned, but specific to the Pantheon integration for WordPress and Drupal. Okay. Now I'm going to quickly talk about browser and then move on to insights. Okay. So let's move on to browser, and I'll quickly kind of address kind of what browser is covering, right? So browser is going to be, first of all, is going to be installed. That agent is going to be installed automatically using APM. So the APM agent is going to be smart enough to actually detect that we are using, let's say, a Drupal environment or a WordPress environment, and start adding the header that will start tracking all this information and sending it over to New Relic. Okay. Now, once you actually go to browser, you're going to see that we have the page load time. Okay, and it divides it into the into 4 different categories: the web application, network time, DOM processing time, and page rendering time. We see an aptics as well. We see throughput by browser as well, which is something that that is something interesting to us, right? Maybe we want to actually find out how many of those users, of the users that we're seeing, are actually using Chrome or Firefox or IE, right? In this case, we know that our most popular browser is it's Chrome. I can select Chrome, and now I'm going to be filtering everything for that specific browser, which is going to now tell me that we have certain versions of Chrome, and then what is the average page load time for Chrome, right? So we will be able to quickly identify if we have a much higher response time or load time for a specific browser. Okay. We can also go to geography, and what that is going to accomplish is going to actually show me the location where most of our customers are coming from, right? If maybe Japan is a popular country for us, we want to make sure that the performance is not 9 seconds, right? If that's the case, we may want to consider, all right, maybe it is worth putting a server, let's say in Japan or somewhere in the APAC area. So I can go in and actually start filtering on that one country so that I know the average page load time compared with the historical performance, right? And if needed, we also want to look at the traffic, right? Maybe the traffic is not as high enough that it's worth actually looking into adding a new server, right? So that's kind of the analysis that you could do with the browser module, okay? Finally, I'll very quickly talk about insights because I feel that it's going to be a really, really powerful tool for you guys to use, especially because all the things that I mentioned are going to be included as part of your packet. Insights is going to have an 8-day data retention for you guys, which will allow you to start querying and integrating your application with your partnership with Pantheon. So let me go ahead and talk about Insights. What is Insights? Insights, like I mentioned before, is going to be this big, big database that, that we built from the bottom up, and it's going to be collecting all this information that originates from all the other modules that I mentioned before. And it's going to be organized into something called an event type. Okay? If I go to Data Explorer, you're going to see that we have a list here that tells us, all right, we have 2 different kinds of event types. One is going to be the one that we call New Relic event. Another one that we call custom events. These are going to be the ones that originate from New Relic technology. These are going to be the ones that originate from outside, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about where they can originate from. If I actually look at the platform, you're going to see that transaction and transaction error will be originating from APM. Synthetic check and request will be coming from synthetics. Page view and page actions will be coming from browser. If you have some doubts, you can actually click transactions and take a look at the sample event, and you're going to see that all of these look backend related. Okay. Now, let's say that we want to start playing around with this, right? We have this data. We have a good understanding of how the schema looks like. How can we interact with that schema? Well, we do that using something called NRQL, or New Relic Querying Language. And you're going to see that it's very, very easy to get started. it can be a point and click, right? So you can see that New Relic is smart enough to actually start giving you options of the things that you can do. I can select, for example, do something like this, and I press enter, and that tells me that we had 2,000 requests from the front end, right? Now you can see that it was really fast, which is one of the differences between the information that we are showing here and the information that we collect from, let's say, APM or browser. Another difference is also that it's all going to be at the individual level. Okay, so I know that we haven't really talked too much about custom attributes, but let's say that you start adding a little bit more properties to the transactions that are happening. All these will be non-aggregated, meaning that it will allow you to start looking at, let's say, the item price, and I'll show you all these custom attributes. All these things will be automatically added for you guys without having to do any additional work, because it's not going to be aggregated, right? Now, what happens if, let's say, we look at the last hour, but we want more, right? We want, let's say, 1 day worth of retention. If I do that now, it responds with around 45,000. Then it can say, I want you to graph that for me. It automatically graphs that, right? Then you can say, I want to divide this information, and facet is something that you may or may not know. You can think of it similar to group by. If I do that, now it's going to be responding with all the cities that I see here. If you look at this and you're like, that is, very complex. It seems kind of crowded here. I can limit it to 5. And if I do that, now I am limiting to the top 5 cities. You can see that there's a couple of non-American cities, and maybe we are only focused on the American traffic. Well, I can just say, well, focus just on the United States. Once I do that, now I have top 3 American cities, which is something that you would be able to very quickly get this information. Now, you can do a lot of things with insights. Once you have that, you can even add things to dashboards, but rather than actually adding them one by one, I'll just quickly show you a couple of dashboards. You can see that the database can, the dashboards can either be very, very technical. As you can see here, this is something that a DBA would love, right? Love to have. You have some accumulated database time by histogram, worst offenders. These kind of things will all be very, very DBA focused, right? But what happens if we're talking to a front-end developer? Then you can go in and actually take a look at that. Or what happens if we're talking to a business associate, right? Or maybe a CEO, a CTO. Well, then we really care more about revenue, okay? And that is something that we're going to be tracking using New Relic, using the things that I mentioned before, custom attributes. This is something that you could add to your code so you start tracking it using New Relic. It's very easy to understand. You can see that we're selecting the sum of all the items from the table transaction, so the backend, where we have an order. Very straightforward, right? You can even take a look at the conversion rate. So before I finish, I really just want to quickly mention how you can actually add these custom attributes. You can always go to Manage Data, click Add Data, and you're going to see that we give you a lot of information as to how you can actually add these attributes. You obviously want to focus on the PHP side. You can see that it's super easy. You literally add this line to the PHP file that you want to add a parameter. Once you do that, that will be a column that will show up as part of one of these tables, most likely transaction in the beginning. So that's really what I wanted to cover with the platform. Like I said, there's a lot of things that I could cover, but unfortunately we only have 1 hour, and I do want to let Josh speak. So I'm going to pass it over to Josh, but we are going to be waiting for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. That's there's a lot there, and New Relic has really evolved. As I said, they've grown enormously over the past 5-6 years into really being one of the premier data-driven companies in the world. And so there's just an enormous amount to explore there, and I really thanks for giving us the broad overview. I'm going to dive in sort of more specifically on the first step of what you showed in your presentation, that kind of going from 0 to 1, the reactive performance response to proactive performance management. I think that's, we're really trying to give everybody on the platform that leg up with this integration. So for those of you who haven't logged into Pantheon lately, you'll notice there is a New Relic item in your site dashboard. You just need to click there, and you can click to activate and turn it on. There's it'll take 60 seconds or so to get everything enabled and hooked up, and then your site environments will need to get traffic before there'll be data in New Relic, but that all happens within a matter of a minute or two. It really is very real time. I'm just going to hop over here to another tab where I have my example site set up, which is it's actually a clone of Pantheon's marketing website, which is a Drupal site. And I'll speak a little bit to the WordPress site as well, but the example I'll show here is a Drupal example. So I think that Pantheon and New Relic actually have a great combined value proposition for website developers. And one of the reasons is that, as Marco pointed out before, you can have multiple applications within one New Relic dashboard. And sort of like one way to imagine that is a microservice model where this application is talking to that application. With Pantheon, what we actually do is set it up so that each environment on Pantheon reports as its own application. And because all of our environments are consistent, they're all driven from the same container-based platform, they all have the same configuration, they all have the same performance characteristics, you actually get New Relic data in dev, test, and live that you can use to like proactively develop performance enhancements and deploy them with a lot of confidence as to what the impact is going to be. So I'm just going to dive in. I'm using a multi-dev environment called Josh K here. So you can see there's like the Pantheon website behind that. Here it is. This is the clone. I'm logged in as an admin to go around and do things. But really, I'm just going to jump into New Relic for the most part. So here we are in the New Relic dashboard. And I'm going to dive into the Josh K environment where a lot of things have been happening. I was clicking around while Marco was doing his demo. So just to say at a high level, to go over this stuff, the main overview you'll get in your application performance monitoring dashboard breaks down at a high level the average response time over all your requests based on a few different dimensions. By default, we've got PHP, MySQL, and web external. What's web external, you might ask? Well, that's calls out to external web services. And in the case of this website, the external services that were being called out to were updates.drupal.org. So, you're familiar with your Drupal or WordPress site will actually phone home to the mothership to find out if there are updates to the core or to any of the modules or plugins or themes that are installed. Those things, because both Drupal and WordPress, their core mothership is usually, it's pretty big, it's pretty high performance, it's meant to run for a lot of things. That's very rarely a source of pain. And so in the overview, you'll see here the green for web external. It's just a little thin slice here and here. It's not really causing a huge hit in terms of the performance of the website overall. But sometimes you might implement a web service that's smaller or maybe has consistency issues and so forth. And one of the common things we actually will see with sites on the platform that are having issues is calling out to external web services that are just not performing that well. You're basically saying your users need to wait on someone else's system. So that can, if that's a problem, this will highlight it very quickly for you. You'll be able to see that right there in the dashboard. And then the other main things, again, SQL query time and code execution time. If this site had Redis enabled, we'd see that as its own band. Usually it's a very thin band because Redis is really fast, but in certain circumstances, for instance, if you have like a crazy loop of like setting and getting caches, or there's something kind of not very optimal in your cache code, you would see that sort of pop up on the overview here. And at a high level, you'd say, oh my gosh, performance isn't going so well, what's wrong? So in this case, the good news is that Pantheon's marketing website overall has fairly good performance, right? It's like our average response times here are under half a second, which is pretty good. But if I scroll down a little bit more, I see some transactions here that look like they're outliers. So we have particular instances where here's something that took 15 seconds, but that was a drush operation, so that's probably okay. Here's some stuff where Drupal was rendering a form that took 12 or 9 seconds. That's maybe worrisome. And then there's some views pages that are taking 4 seconds or so, which is a little bit worrying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into the transactions screen to see if I can learn more about what some of those slow transactions are. Even though it looks like overall performance is good, I get the sense from those sort of transactions that are sticking out that some of our visitors are actually having a pretty poor experience. So we can look at the overall, like what's going on, and it's mostly node pages, and those seem to be mostly fast. But if we go down here, we can see, aha, here's where we see the transactions that stick out. So here's one that's slow, and it's like the performance page, and this was actually, I know, from 15 minutes ago when I went in and cleared the cache. So like that, I can, as an administrator of the site, I know that that's not going to be a fast operation. I don't expect it to be a fast operation. Likewise, going to the form that forces Drupal to fetch all the updates from Drupal.org may not be a fast operation. I wanted to do that so that we would see the web external time in the overall graph. Those don't worry me. But these other ones kind of do worry me, right? Like, why is our team page so slow? Like, it's just really rendering the bios of everybody that works at Pantheon. Like, we're not a huge company yet. We've only got about 100 employees. So you would not expect that to take a long time to render. Likewise, the agency finder, that's just, a screen that like shows people how to find agencies that are affiliated with Pantheon. That shouldn't take all that long to load. And it's not super slow, but it seems like maybe it could be quite a bit faster than this. So I'm going to dive in and see what New Relic can tell me about these transactions. We'll start with the agency finder. And when we go in here, you see, oh, I think probably this is a database issue. Just looking at the overall things that are coming up, and you seeing that it's like field selects and subqueries and node selects and so forth. Those are really the things that are bubbling up to the top, and this is a page that's driven by a Drupal view. View is the systems in Drupal that allows you to sort of, with the admin UI, click together different queries. Sometimes, it's machine-generated queries. They're not the most optimal. So if I actually want to dive in, I can see the database queries, and I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, what's the slowest one, though? And ooh, yeah, this looks like we've got some big, long, chunky queries here that probably will need to be refactored as our agency portfolio grows. We have several hundred in there now, but we're going to, and we're adding more every week. And so I think, for our developers, we'll have to take a look at optimizing our agency finder for performance in the future. And that's like, it's not like on fire or anything. It's not, killing the site performance or taking the site down. But it gives us an idea of something we might want to focus on in the future and iterate on. And the great news is we can iterate on that in this multi-dev environment without having any impact on the live site. We can take our time, we can work on it, and then we can be really sure that when we deploy it, that it's going to have the desired effect. So refactoring that view or even replacing it with like a different handcrafted query could be done in this environment and then deployed using Pantheon's dev test live workflow, and you would have no risk for the live site and be improving performance and be measuring that all the way along. We'll show a little bit about that in a second. The other one I want to dig into, though, is that that overall team page, because it actually has been, I've teed myself up here for a different kind of problem. And in this case, I see that there's still some queries in there, but when we dig into the details, I actually don't see the queries showing up at the top of this list in terms of the things that are where the call count is high or the duration is high. I see some stuff in the entity controller and like render fields and theming. And that seems to think, oh, maybe this is actually not a database problem. It could be that the queries here are very efficient. It's actually maybe something in code. And so if I go into the trace details, this is where you can start diving really deep. And this is the full stack trace of the application. So starting with bootstrap stuff, which is generally pretty fast, that's all fine. And then we get into the execution of the view. And you can see we're like drilling down in time and time and time, and we're kind of looking for where, okay, now we're into theming. Oh, now we're into rendering the fields, and New Relic is helpful in that it'll sort of call out like, hey, almost all the time, 80% of the time you've spent is under this call. So this is probably an indication of where you're at in terms of needing to dive in. And so what we'll do is we'll say expand performance problems, and this will blow it out in a second here with a bunch more. Yeah, a bunch more. And if I dig through here, what I'll see relatively soon is that there's, here's the one. So this is the team page template pre-process views view field. So I've got some code in there that handles the team page. It looks like maybe that is the source of the problem in terms of it's not the querying of the data from the database. It's actually the rendering of the query. So what I would do here is I would go into, I've got my handy-dandy SFTP client connected to this environment. I've drilled into sites all modules custom team page. That's the little bit of code that manages the team page. It's actually a Drupal feature export. And I can dig into the team page module. And lo and behold, once this opens up, I have a performance problem that I've set up for myself here. And basically, this is something that actually happens can be pretty common. In order to get what we wanted from the output, we wanted to do something special with the LinkedIn link. And so initially when we were developing this, maybe the developer who put this together, which was actually us, we manufactured this problem for the demo. But this is a pretty common thing for a developer to do. They're like, oh, I need an extra piece of data. Let me go ahead and load the node again. Or, oh, I need an extra little bit from here. Let me go fetch that from the database. And they're not thinking about this in terms of they're thinking about it in terms of one instance, but then when it's being run hundreds of times, it actually can really slow down the performance. And so once I realized this, the first thing I might do is say, well, what would happen if I just didn't do this work? What if I returned out of this loop super quickly? In fact, I can just move this up here, so we don't even. Well, why not just put it in there? We'll just exit out of here. I'm just going to make that change, and back in my Pantheon dashboard. In my code area, transmit is loading it. Okay, cool. That's up there. The Pantheon dashboard's aware of the change that I've made. I can be like, okay, that's what it is. That's what I would expect it to be. I'm going to go ahead and load the team page again to make sure I didn't break something. I might have introduced a syntax error. That would be a bummer. So here's the team page. It seems like that loaded okay, so I'm going to go ahead and commit that change in the Pantheon dashboard. So optimizing team page, click commit, and now I'm using version control without having to go to the command line, which is kind of nice because you can just kind of debug directly in the Pantheon multi-dev environments, get your work done there, measure that the change is doing what you want it to do, and then ultimately use the deployment system to either combine with other developers' work or get ready to deploy it out to the live environment. And if I go back while this is syncing to the overall page, we can just try reloading this a couple times maybe. That seems like it's a bit snappier. Yeah, it's definitely coming through a bit quicker, which is great. Because now I'm not going to see a slower transaction for the team page in New Relic. And I did those reloads, and if we go out back to the transaction overview, in fact, I don't think we'll see. Yeah, so there was the first one was there, but the subsequent ones aren't going to show up as I continue to reload the page. It's coming through under the time limit. And the key for whether something shows up in this transactions trace list actually goes back to that AppDex question. That's actually configurable. So you can say, hey, for my application, I want an AppDex that's lower. Like if you're really trying to super optimize your website, you might go in and in your development environment, again, this is a setting just for this one multi-dev environment. You could go in here and say, I'm going to set this AppDex down to 0.1. Which means that most transactions are going to show up as being a little bit too slow. And you wouldn't want to do this in production because it'll turn your graphs red and tell you that everything is bad. But in a development environment, you could decide to say, I'm going to tune the AppDex down so that I can get a sense of where the next wins are in terms of performance. Very often when you're building a high-performance website, sometimes, again, if there's a big outlier or something, breaks loose, that'll be really obvious in the overview, and you'll be able to dive in, really identify the bottleneck, and fix it, and that'll be a big win. But other times, you'll end up in the situation where you want to optimize. And optimizing is really about finding the 5% win here, the 10% win there, the 100 milliseconds you could shave off there. So tuning down your AppDex is a way to give you a sense of where the next lowest hanging fruit are can be a really good tactic if you're looking to proactively optimize your application. So then the last thing I want to show is over here in the overview, if my demo goes well, hey, look, the last thing I want to show that we do at Pantheon is with our Quicksilver platform hooks, we make it really easy to integrate with New Relic to log your commits and your deploys directly into New Relic so you can see the results. So for instance, this little green line here is the commit that I just made. So you can see it says, it's got the revision ID, it says optimizing team page, and if you actually drill into these, New Relic has a pretty cool thing. We're not going to see too much here because we just made the commit, but you can do this kind of like change report, which will say the 24 hours before and after a deployment was made, what the difference was in performance. So like this is extremely helpful when you're rolling out to the live environment and you've done your due diligence, you've worked it in the multi-dev environment, you did some acceptance testing, you have a pretty good idea of what the performance impacts are going to be. New Relic will actually help you do that analysis by saying, we're going to log this deployment to the live environment, and then you can click to this report afterwards and say, before and after, the changes were what we thought, not as good as what we thought, not what we thought, and it like really helps you have discipline around what you're doing to improve the performance. So that's really the overview of like sort of the deep dive of how to use this in the context of a Drupal or WordPress site. There's some Drupal awareness in this case where we can look at time breakdown by modules, by hooks, by views. WordPress has something similar by plugin, and they have hooks as well. We're mostly talking about the APM portion here because on the Pantheon platform, we're already managing the servers, so that's not something, that's where we're trying to take that burden off of web developers. I will say that the Insights has a bunch of value, and you'll get 7 days of data for free with New Relic Insights. So you can start to build your own custom reports if you want, or if you really want to dig into it. As Marco showed, there's a bunch of things you can kind of dive deeper on in terms of adding just a little bits of PHP code to your website. You can exclude certain transactions. If you have certain things that are like ultra fast, like it's just the website's just like shooting out a redirect, and you don't want that to artificially like make it look like your aggregate performance is faster than before, you can say exclude this from the transaction. You can also send specific data. So like if you know a certain code path or a certain type of interaction is of particularly high value, or it has like metadata that you'd like to send to New Relic about that, you can do that within your PHP code, and then using Insights build your own custom monitoring data and dashboards around all these things. So there's obviously like a ton more to dive into, but hopefully this has given you a sense of like where the like immediate tangible value is in terms of ensuring that all of your websites are fast, which everybody cares about because it matters for customer experience, it matters for SEO, it matters for time on site, it matters for purchasing decisions, it matters for brand. I don't think anybody disputes that performance is really a must-have for websites today, and I'm hoping that with everything we do for you on the platform side, with everything we can give you with Pantheon in terms of like a properly tuned environment and good caching, the one thing we can't give you is a high-performance application. But with New Relic application performance monitoring, we give you the best possible tools to ensure that that's what you're bringing to the platform. And I think with that, we'll probably open it up for questions.
Alrighty, guys. So you can submit your questions now. We'll start with a few. And the first one is, which New Relic modules are activated with Pantheon? Do you get all of what was demoed or a subset?
Yeah, I can talk to that. So the Pantheon's partnership with New Relic includes all of the modules, but APM Pro is the big upgrade. So all of the modules come in like kind of different flavors from New Relic, where there's like different amounts of data retention, and in some cases certain features are available or not. What we make available is the APM Pro, which is gives you all the stuff that we showed in terms of diving into the application traces, the database queries, the sort of back-end performance of the website. We don't have, and so for instance, when I said you have Insights, but it's 7 days of data retention, at higher levels, like if you wanted to buy it yourself, you could buy more data retention and more data for Insights, etc. So it's kind of the standard light, or I guess light, is that right? The light version of the other modules, but the application performance monitoring comes at the pro level of service, which is something that a lot of websites, they just don't have the wherewithal to actually implement themselves, so we just want to make it like there on the platform for everybody.
Alrighty, next question is, does New Relic only monitor activity, or does it also monitor if servers go down or the server has dropouts?
So there's actually, I can kind of speak to this. This is a cool thing that we do. This is not the greatest example because I'm in a multi-dev environment, so there's only like one instance. There's only one application container at work, which is why I can edit it directly. But in your overall dashboard, if you see, if you're at one of our higher levels of service and you're scaled out to multiple application containers in production, you'll actually see New Relic thinks of those as servers, even though they're just individual containers, and you can actually get a breakdown of performance by container. which is a way that if there's, it's usually a bug on our side if one container is performing very different than another consistently, but you can kind of see that here. The other thing you can also do in New Relic is turn on availability monitoring. So this has not only can you monitor performance, and you can set up alerts if your performance goes below a certain threshold, but you can also use New Relic to monitor for downtime. So it's like kind of, you don't have to set up that extra pingdom account or whatever else you might normally do. You can set it up right in here. You can set up an alert policy. There's actually you can go pretty deep with the alert policies. There's like webhooks and integration with PagerDuty and all Slack and all kinds of other things you could do from the New Relic side. So that is a value add part of the APM Pro upgrade.
And one thing that I would like to note, this is Marco from New Relic, is that the availability monitor is kind of the APM availability monitoring, but Synthetics also gives you, I think, up to 50 or 20, I forget what the number is, but X amount of pings that you can actually do, monitor types that you can actually do, so you can actually monitor, let's say, multiple like URLs. So you can have, let's say, up to 20 or 50. I think it's 50. But yeah, you will be able to add all these URLs and then kind of not replace, but at the very least, monitor more than just one per applications like the APM would actually give you. And that's, again, absolutely free. It's included with APM Pro, which you're getting with the partnership with Pantheon.
Yeah, so the availability monitoring here is really, and it gives you, like, it'll actually break down by SLA and give you some reports. But this is kind of like, it's a one check. Like, is your site available or not? With the Synthetics, you can set up, like, not only was this particular URL available, but what was the performance of this particular URL? Exactly. So you can kind of get some data, some baseline data on that over time. So it's kind of a cool thing to dig into with Synthetics.
Yeah. All right, next question is, do you plan on supporting SNI in the future? Synthetic monitoring appears to be the only workaround for a cloud proxy ping issue I'm experiencing.
Huh.
So I'm not sure exactly. So SNI is a way of doing HTTPS, and it's possible that Pantheon actually doesn't deliver SNI right now. We're actually actively investigating some options there so we can lower the cost of HTTPS and try to make it more available to the platform. We don't natively do any SNI, and so the downside is, like, because SNI is a newer protocol for terminating HTTPS, some browsers, so like particularly anybody, like there's old browsers like people on Windows XP, poor souls, or like really old mobile devices can't use it. It's also possible that some bots or monitoring services might have issues with SNI, but it's not something that is actually, I don't know whether there's a limitation around Synthetics or New Relics.
As far as I know, no. I mean, because we use Selenium JavaScript for Synthetics, so as long as you can do the check using Selenium, you should be able to. If you kind of have an additional question, you can contact our support team or just myself, marco@newrelic.com. So.
Awesome. Next question is, what would be required to hook into CI, for example, to automatically confirm that a change doesn't blow the apdex?
Ah, that's a really good question. So I'm going to just go in and show, like, you can talk. I'm going to pull up some code real quick.
Okay, sounds good. So just to repeat the question, so let's say that we do actually have a deployment. So what exactly is it going to be modifying it? So what it's going to be doing, that we'll be able to monitor the performance before and after. And what's going to happen is that we actually will give you the change log that will actually tell you, all right, look, this is what happened, this is when it happened, and at a transactional level, what exactly the repercussion was. And I think Josh can actually talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and then how you'd actually do that, make that happen, would be using our Quicksilver platform hooks. And we have an example that you can just, I'm actually going to tune this example up because I improved it a little bit for the demo. We put this together when we first released Quicksilver a few months ago, but I can add some upgrades, and maybe we'll get some pull requests after this webinar. But basically, this is a script that allows you to post in to the New Relic API to log the deployments, and then you actually could extend this more, because what this is really just showing is how to exercise New Relic's API. So you could take this script and say, I want to post a deploy in, I also want to extract data out. So if you wanted to make part of your continuous integration process that you do a deploy, you mark the deploy, you run some test that simulates some traffic, and then you pull out the appdex and compare it to what it was historically. That's completely doable, and you would just you could use this script as a basis for not just mark, login, deploy in, but also pulling the data out.
Yeah, and following on that, you can actually also modify the appdex_t, which is going to be that kind of calibration that you have. So that you can take this deployment, and if this hits, let's say, a performance related fix or upgrade, you can actually say, yeah, whenever I get a yes for this, then decrease the appdex_t, the calibration, right, by 10%, so that you actually keep forcing yourself, and it's all automated.
Yeah. So there's actually like a world of possibility in terms of integrating New Relic's API further with Pantheon via the Quicksilver platform hooks that can happen automatically, in addition to you just kind of doing some of the stuff in the New Relic's dashboard yourself.
All right, next question says, thanks for the great introduction. Is there any easy way to segment front-end performance for non-authenticated users from back-end user experience?
Yeah, so that's really what this is all about. You would need a way to flag the transaction internally as one. Because in actuality, like if you set your website up correctly, the non-authenticated users should be getting a cached page, like on Pantheon from our edge or further up the stack. You're still going to want to care about what their front-end performance is, but the effective like server response time is as good as it's ever going to be anywhere, because it should be like under 10 milliseconds. But being able to say in your application, I'm serving a page to an anonymous visitor. Let's mark that so that in the browser or in Insights, you can filter those as separate. Versus, you could also say this is a page from a logged-in user, and that would let you break that down here when you're looking at backend performance.
And just following on that, so there's kind of two ways how I would approach it. One would be to actually create a different application for the backend, another one for the front end, right? Depending on the access of the code, and maybe Josh, you can help me out with that, if a customer has the ability to add, let's say, a Google Analytics-like snippet to their code, what they can do is go in and actually, let's say, add this level of code, this little code that will send to one application for the admin pages, and those that do not contain the admin, then send it to another application, right? That'll be one way. Let's say that is that possible or not?
It would be. That's an interesting use case. So certainly people can add JavaScript to their websites, and they can make that reporting in. By default, Pantheon kind of creates the applications for you when you spin up environments. But I think that it's probably doable for you to set something up.
Let's say that it's not possible. I think it would be possible, but let's say that it's not. One of the things that I would also suggest is that you add a custom attribute, right? Very simple, add a custom attribute from the PHP side, saying, yes, this is admin, or no, this is not admin, right? Or if, let's say, you do not want to modify your code, one of the things that you can do is go to Insights and say, cut down the traffic into those URLs that have admin as part of it, and those that do not, right? And then you manually start kind of looking at that analysis. So definitely there's a lot of possibilities. It goes from, I think, the most comfortable one, which would be two different applications at the easiest way to do it. But, the other one would be a little bit more manual, but it's also doable.
All right, next question is, are we able to increase the number of monitors? We currently use Pingdom to monitor around 200 sites.
So our integration with New Relic makes this so that there is an application and an account created. There's actually a unique account is generated for each website, and so within that website there are multiple applications. Those applications by default represent the different environments on Pantheon. They all have their own monitors. So like every environment can be monitored separately. I would think if you're talking in the numbers of hundreds, you would probably want to look at automating some of the configuration, because clicking through and setting up 100 monitors sounds like a tedious job to me. But that's totally doable. And again, I would say if that's a standard part of your process, I would look to some of the stuff that's possible with the Quicksilver platform hooks, so that when you basically you hook it in so that every time you deploy, you ensure that your monitoring configuration is exactly what you want it to be. And if you're just like, I don't think there's any downside to like setting the monitoring configuration again. Or we're working on an update to Quicksilver that will actually help when you're initializing new projects on Pantheon. So that would be another way to have that be a standard part of your project spec. When you initialize a new site on Pantheon, it turns on New Relic, and then it goes and like sets up the monitoring that you want for those environments.
Yes.
All right. I believe this next question came during your demo, Marco, and that is, the geo example of Japan seemed to show the page rendering was taking the most time. Is this reflecting translation?
So if the page automatically translates before the page load time has finished, then yes. In order for us to kind of decisively find out, you would actually need to use a feature called session traces, which is actually included as part of the Pro offering. That's why it didn't really show that, but that would be something that you could look into. And if you are interested, let's say, in finding out more information about this Pro offer, which really kind of breaks down the resources that took, let's say, 3 seconds out of those 9 seconds, or 2 seconds, all of this information at the resource level, similar to the web developer tools in Chrome, we can talk offline. So definitely, it's a really good question, but really, you can't decisively know until you actually look at the session traces. It may or may not, depending on the page load time.
Yeah, and it could also reflect if you don't have for instance, if you don't have a CDN in place, or you don't have like a point of presence in Japan, that could just be because there's the round trips to load all the assets for the page takes more time because the speed of light is a limiter.
And to be honest, I think that's really what was happening.
Yeah, most likely.
Most likely, yeah.
All right, next question is, how does BigPipe affect the front end of rendering versus back end processing?
So BigPipe is a technique for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a technique for delivering non-cacheable web pages in a way that gets there to render faster. And you see that in use by popular web applications like Twitter, Facebook. Like anytime you go to a web page and like the main frame of the web page loads super fast, but then like some other part of it pops in a second or two later. It's a technique that's built into Drupal 8, which is actually huge because it's kind of a major engineering effort to implement this on a custom basis for a website, but if it's built into the core of your CMS, it gives you this benefit. The real win of BigPipe is all about the uncacheable use case. If you can actually cache the full page result further up the stack, either like in your CMS or better yet in like Varnish or a CDN above it, that's still going to be way faster than BigPipe because just like send them all the data right away, make sure your front end is good so that it doesn't block to render, but that will be faster than what BigPipe can deliver. What BigPipe really improves upon is the non-cached like log or admin kind of use case. And so it's really going to be mostly about looking at back-end response time for those, because what you're doing with BigPipe is you're allowing the user to get some of the experience before the back-end completely finishes the transaction. I haven't actually looked into doing this yet, but it's on kind of my to-do list for the summer, is the way that Drupal's BigPipe the way that its render pipeline is set up, it should be possible to actually do custom events as each segment of the content is delivered to go down the pipe. So you'd be able to get like a breakout in New Relic of core HTML delivered, first segment delivered, second segment delivered. So you'd be able to see like, oh man, our core HTML is super fast, but segment 3 is really lagging. Let's focus on segment 3 for improving the performance. Perfect.
All right, next question is, we'll take a couple more and go over time a little. Will the APM instances still be generated automatically for multi-dev environments if we upgrade?
Yes. Actually, everybody's already upgraded. We went ahead and did it for you.
Next question, is there anything special to know about using New Relic with a WordPress site?
So I didn't dig into that example for this because we wanted to use our own marketing website and like really eat our own dog food, and that happens to be built in Drupal. We have some documentation actually on specifically diving into Pantheon and WordPress, and there's a video you can watch. The difference is like the same overall breakdown is actually the same. You're going to be looking at external calls, database performance, and code performance. Those are still going to be the 3 biggest segments that you'll want to care about. The only difference is that there will be, like this has Drupal here as a category, there will be a WordPress section that will give you some high level kind of, some basically the way it really works in real life when you're either proactively optimizing, which means you're kind of setting that apdex down to like an aggressive level and looking at what transactions pop out, or somebody's kind of upset that the site is slow. And when they're upset that the site is slow, the first thing you do is you look at the overview and you see whether one of these things is an outlier. Like, oh my gosh, you can see over the past day the database just doubled in time, so it's a query. Now we go digging for queries. Or, oh my gosh, the code performance has gone up. What could that be? Let's look into slow transactions. The CMS breakdown is another way to kind of get a sense of where, at a high level, when you're narrowing in on the problem. So you can be like, is the problem in one of our modules? Or on WordPress side, it would be one of the plugins. Is it in one of the hooks? Is it in one of the views? It can give you a sense of how to zero in on where the problem is so that you can replicate it in your development environment and then work on improving the performance. So those are the things to be aware of for WordPress. But overall, the value proposition is basically the same.
All right, next question is, does this integrate with Google Data Studio?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't actually know. I'm not super familiar with Google Data Studio. I wonder if that's part of their new Analytics 360.
It seems that way, yeah.
The data almost certainly doesn't integrate because they're almost like competing products. Although you can, I definitely know people who, Google Analytics also has an API for logging events, and I know people who have taken the same approach of logging deployments to New Relic to logging the deployments in their Google Analytics dashboard, and it can be useful to actually have these sort of time markers in multiple systems, so you can see oh, over here in New Relic, I can see that we did this deploy and it improved our performance by 10%. And oh, over here in Google Analytics, I can see that our traffic actually increased and our session time increased. It'd be like that performance improvement led to real-world results.
Now,
but direct integration of the data, I don't think works out of the box.
Yeah, exactly. It's not out of the box. It doesn't really mean that we cannot actually take the information, let's say, from Google Studio, or if we are not sharing that information. So we have an API that both takes in some data, right, or it can actually expose the data that we already capture. So definitely there's an in and out, but you have to build that kind of bridge between the two data sources.
Yeah, that would be sort of your own custom ETL process.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a couple more questions. The next one on that same Google note, is New Relic replacing the need for Google Analytics, or is there use for both?
So I can take that. So, I mean, it's something that I get asked quite a bit, especially when I was in SC. I would never really advise against, let's say, totally replacing Google Analytics. I think every use case, every customer is different, and you have to make sure that you look at the features that we offer against the features that Google offers. I know that a lot of them overlap. I have worked with customers that have successfully migrated off of Google. Especially those customers that are paying, I believe, something like $50,000, some pretty large amount of money. But it is something that it would be a kind of a case-by-case basis. It does happen. I wouldn't advise, without looking at the customer, without talking to the customer. So that would be my answer. I think it could. I don't know if it would for you every single time, but we can definitely talk a little bit more if you are interested in talking and setting up some time.
I think that the real kind of one of the, maybe the fork in the road, if people are wondering about that, is if you have if your website is really leans towards the application side of the spectrum, Google Analytics is not the best tool for measuring deep application, because it's all URL based, and oftentimes in an application there's a bunch of subtlety that's going on in the JavaScript and elsewhere that makes it its default behavior is really geared towards content-oriented website experiences. So I think that if you have a content-oriented website, you're worried about your campaign performance and whether you're some of the other things, if you use Google's AdWords or anything else like that, their built-in integration will have a lot of value. That's probably going to augur for having that be Google's job, and the New Relic care more about performance. But if you have a very application type website, especially if you're thinking about integrating analytics between your website application, your mobile application, other things like that, Google Analytics would be a little bit more of a force to make it provide all that data for you. I'm sure Google will tell you they could do anything too, but I think that sort of plays to New Relic's strong suits.
Correct.
All right, we'll take two more quick questions, and that is there any way to change the apdex score for multiple sites? We have 450-ish.
So we do offer an API. So I mean, you definitely can do that. You will just quickly run a script that will go in and actually take a look at that. Now, if you are going to be automating this, what I would suggest is that you actually look at, let's say, the average in the last, let's say, 3 days or whatever, and you use that as an app.txt, right? So you take the average, then you add maybe a 10, 15, 20%, depending on how comfortable you are and how many alerts you want to get, and also if it's a dev environment or a prod environment, right? And then you update the app.txt, right? Or you can also have a spreadsheet if that's kind of something that you want to do. But I know that customers really would just rather use the data that we already are tracking.
Yeah, and so again, the way that you'll want to do this if you have a large volume of sites will be to look at leveraging the Quicksilver platform tools and maybe also some of the tools from our command line interface Terminus, so you could, again, script this out so that you're not trying to go and do individual configurations or individual API calls. You probably want to dev it with like a small handful of sites, but then once you build that out, it should be very possible to say, I'd like to do a New Relic API call for this environment of this site, and their whole API is available to you as part of this partnership.
Yes.
All right, last question. Sean, we'll make it yours, and that is, can New Relic monitor other Pantheon subsystems, such as Solar and Redis?
Yes. So the example here doesn't show it because I wanted to keep it sort of simple, but when you have Redis in play, that will be filtered out as another top-line item. And Solar actually appears as an external service because communication to Solar happens over HTTP. So from New Relic's perspective, even though it's internal to Pantheon, it will show up as an external service. And so if you're curious about your Solar performance, you would keep an eye on Web External, and you would like go in here to see like what might be happening in terms of like where the time is looking at. If you were very concerned about Solar and you had like a lot of custom integration going on there, that would be a place where in your custom code, I would say you could maybe mark those transactions and label them so you could easily parse them out and see how they're performing.
Correct. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you all so much for watching. If you have any additional questions or feedback, please visit our website where you'll find a contact us page, and we'll put you in touch with the best member of our team. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.